Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is my October wrap-up. I'm just going to be talking through all the books I read in October. This was a great reading month for me, so I'm really excited to talk about these books. Leave me a comment down below what your favorite book you read in October was, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any new videos from me. And without further ado, let's get into the video. Quick stats before we get into it. I read 3 mystery, 5 fantasy, and 3 historical fiction, and I read a total of 11 books. I read 5,942 pages this month, which is crazy. I read quite a few long books, which is fun. I got some awesome 5-star reads this month, so let's just go through them in chronological order. Most of these books I read in reading vlogs that are all already posted on my channel, so if you're interested in some more in-depth real-time reactions to these, make sure you go check out those videos. I'm just gonna give you some high-level thoughts on what I thought about these books. So first book I finished in October was The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This is a mystery thriller set in Vermont on a lake, and this main character in this book is watching her neighbors across the lake, and that's all I'll say. I gave this book 4 stars. It was very fun, super fast paced. I read it really quickly. I was like hooked pretty much from the beginning. But Riley Sager, he's kind of weird at writing female characters. Like the 2 books I've read by him with female main characters, kind of strange. And the way that they did the plot twist in this book, I didn't like. And I won't say what it was, I don't want to spoil anything, but I just didn't like the choice of theme, if you will. But I had a fun time reading it, so I rated it at 4 stars. The next book I read was The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This book was so good. I rated this one 5 stars. It's a story about a man named Hiram who was born into slavery and ends up escaping. It follows his journey while he was enslaved, and then also how he escapes and what he does after he escapes. And the way that this was told was so beautiful. I feel like Ta-Nehisi Coates did a great job of putting us into Hiram's shoes and watching him learn more about the world around him and learn what life is like as a free person. And I loved this. It was so good. So if you haven't read this book, I would definitely recommend. The next book I finished was Somewhere Beyond the Sea by TJ Klune. This is such a sweet book. This is the follow-up to The House on the Cerulean Sea, and I rated it a 4.5. I loved this because I loved the first book and I loved those characters. They're so important to me and I just care so deeply about them, and so that was the main reason I liked this book. This one was a lot more about like resistance, and there were heavy themes that were trying to be a metaphor for fighting for queer rights and justice of like any marginalized community. And the reason this didn't get a higher rating for me was because I felt like it could have been a little more subtle than how it was portrayed in the book. Obviously I agree with what TJ Klune is saying here, and I just loved it. And shout out TJ Klune for writing happy queer fantasy stories. So if you haven't read this duology, definitely read it. It's like one of my favorite books ever, and after rereading the first book, it has become even more of a favorite for me. First sort of disappointment, letdown of the month was Billy Summers by Stephen King. I really wanted to like this, and I rated this a 3.5. I really wanted to like this, but there were some parts of it that I was really enjoying that were fast-paced, that I was like, okay, what's Billy Summers gonna do next? Like, how is he gonna solve this problem? How will he get the job done? It's basically about this guy named Billy Summers who's a hitman, but he only kills bad people, and he gets one last job, and this job requires him to stay and develop like a presence in the community before he actually does it. He's a little bit skeptical, but he's like, well, I'll take the $2 million. So that part of it was really interesting, and then halfway through the book it kind of changes a lot. There were just some parts, like a lot of very stereotypical characters, some really gross things that happen, just like icky stuff. Like definitely check the trigger warnings before you read this book that I just felt like were a little bit unnecessary to the plot and made me not love it as much. So I'm not writing off Stephen King. I did like a lot of the writing, but I don't know, this one didn't do it for me. The next book I read was House of Sky and Breath, which is the second book in the Crescent City series. And this book, I was really confused when I started it. I finally got into it and I did really enjoy it. I think that I liked Bryce a little better in this book. I liked the romance that was happening in this book. The ending of this book was crazy. I do think that the world that she built in this this series is so complex. It was confusing to read, but once you got it, it was pretty good. This one I rated a 3.75, and I'll just talk about the third book because I read this in October too, House of Flame and Shadow. This one I ended up rating 4 stars. I liked this one a lot more because I think by this point I was like, okay, I know what's going on. I didn't have a big break between reading this one and book 2, so I didn't forget anything. I like the way they followed up at the beginning of this book with what happened at the end of the last book. Read it, you know. I finally feel like in this book I like cared about the characters. That's all I really have to say. I love Sarah J Maas. I think she's so good at connecting plot points throughout the whole series, and that definitely happens in this book. Now I'm all done with the Maasverse. I'm like ready to do a reread. I just really like her. She's popular for a reason. After House of Sky and Breath, I read The Family Remains. This book I rated a 3 stars. This was the lowest rated book I read this month. There was no point to this book. Like, it was the follow-up to The Family Upstairs, which was a pretty good thriller. Everything that happened in this book was just like a new character finding out the plot of what happened in the first book. Like, there was no point in it. And in the end, it was like we uncovered these things and then they covered them back up. I don't know. I did not like this book very much, but I didn't dislike my experience reading it. But then when I was done, I was like, oh, well, there was really no point to that. So I rated it 3 stars. We'll still read Lisa Jewell books. I think she's a good, easy read thriller author. Next book I finished was A Discovery of Witches. This is a fantasy, I don't want to say dark academia, but kind of dark academia book about a witch named Diana who is a scholar. She has a PhD and she studies alchemy. And one day when she's in the library, she gets this book that's like this very magical manuscript, and then all of these magical creatures show up and they're like, girl, we want that book for our species. And then this vampire comes along and he's like, you cannot give it to any of them. And then the book sort of turns into like a romance story between her and the vampire. The vibes in this were great. It was very fall, spooky, Halloweeny, witchy, academic. Like, a lot of this book is just her sitting in the library, and the writing was really good, but there was really no plot. So I rated it a 4 stars. I will read the next one because the way this ended, like, I need to know what happened next. I don't know. I did not like the way this one ended, I'll say that, but I did like the vibes. All right, next 5-star read of the month, which was The Secret Life of Bees. As you can see, I have tabbed this one all up. I underlined as I was reading and then went back and added like color-coded tabs. This book is about a young girl named Lily and her nanny, who's kind of like a maternal figure for her since her mom died when she was young, gets arrested while they're together in the town, and then she goes and breaks her nanny out of jail and runs away to a little bit north in South Carolina, and she ends up living with this family of Black women who own this honey business. This young girl Lily is learning a lot about life and about herself, and she was so easy to fall in love with. The writing in this book was absolutely phenomenal. Like, this is a stellar example of show don't tell. I don't know that I've read a book, at least that I can remember, that has done such a good job of show don't tell as this book did, and I was drawn to continue reading because I just loved the writing. But then by the end, I cared so deeply about the characters. There are some interesting themes of race in this book because it's set in the 60s, and her nanny is Black, and 3 sisters who are also Black, and she is sort of seeing what it's like to be a white girl in a space of mostly Black people, where obviously her life up until this point has been kind of the other way around. I thought that that was interesting. I just loved this so much, and I would absolutely recommend this to everybody. Okay, next book, which was also a 5-star read. Actually, theme here, the only 3 books I gave 5 stars this month were historical fictions, which is interesting. This is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This book is about 2 sisters, Vienne and Isabel, and they live in France, and this takes place during World War II, during the German occupation of France, and both sisters are experiencing the war in different ways. They are involved in different things. Vienne has to take a German Nazi soldier into her house. One thing I really liked about this book was it showed the complex feelings of wartime. I just liked how this showed that not everything is black and white, and you think all the time, like, how could there have been so many people that were fighting for Hitler? But you read stories like these where the soldiers are just like, I'm fighting for my country, this is what I know. And we know now how horrible it was because we have all of the history and all of the stories, and it's been decades since that happened. but in the middle of it, nobody really knew what was going on. So anyway, I love that part of it. I also love hearing stories of women in the resistance, and I just loved this book. The writing was beautiful. I was so connected to the characters, and I just think Kristen Hanna is a fantastic historical fiction author. I'm so glad I finally read this. If you haven't read this, you must. Last book I read this month was Assistant to the Villain. I read this sort of on my Kindle. Mostly I listened to it. I just finished this one today, and I rated this one a 3.75 stars. It was silly. I think that the comedy-ness of it made me forget it was like an adult book, and then they would swear and I'd be like, wait, what's going on? This feels like a children's book. I enjoyed it. If you know, it's a story about this girl, a woman, I don't know how old she was, who ends up working for the villain, who's just this guy in this medieval town. There's not a lot of world building. She's his assistant, and she kind of falls in love with him and is kind of really like, she's one of those like, I can fix you girls, which I personally resonate with a little bit. She was really a funny character. It was fun to watch him change through her eyes, and we get both the villain and the main character Evie's perspective, and it was fun to see both sides. This ended totally on a cliffhanger, and I have the next book downloaded as an audiobook, so I probably will listen to that soon. It was fun and silly. It was the perfect book to read after reading like a very heavy historical fiction book, and if you're thinking about reading it, it was pretty quick and I enjoyed it, so I'd recommend it. It's also on Kindle Unlimited, which is why I had it on my Kindle, but yeah, I would recommend it. It was fun. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of October. Like I said, this was a great reading month. Let me know what your favorite book of October was. I would love to chat about some of these books in the comments. If you've read them, let me know what you think. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any more videos from me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, friends.